I'm Daisy.
And I'm Terri.
And this is the Monday Mindset Podcast,
where we share things of interest to us and hopefully to you.
So let's get started with episode number 155.
And this week, it's Daisy's turn to share something with us. Daisy, what do you have for us?
Well, Terri, best laid plans and all that. I did have something that I was going to bring to you for my next episode. And then life got in the way and that has somewhat been put on hold. And I was going to go back to that to prepare for our recording today. But a newsletter caught my eye in the meantime, as is so often the case. And it struck a chord. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to throw this one in instead. Now, this is a newsletter that I've shared from before. It's from TED. So TED, if you remember, stands for the Empowerment Dynamic, which is the new, more productive, happy, all singing, dancing triangle that's the antidote to the dreaded drama triangle. I won't go over the details because I've already done that numerous times, and you can go back and listen, dear listener, if you do want to find out to one of those previous episodes. But Donna Zajonc and David Emerald send out a newsletter every week, which is always nice and brief and quite interesting, and it just revolves around this, the empowerment dynamic framework, and gives you a few suggestions for how to restructure. If you remember, there's the dreaded drama triangle and the dynamic that goes on with that, and they reframe it in the empowerment dynamic to change, for example, the persecutor role that you get in the dreaded drama triangle becomes the challenger in the empowerment dynamic. And this is what this newsletter revolves around. The title of it is How to Be Grateful Even When Problems Arise. And I'm sure as I tell you what's in this newsletter, you'll probably realise why it struck a chord. But their kickoff is basically talking a little bit about something that we've talked about many times, the idea of being grateful and gratitude journals and the different mindset that gets you into, which, as you can imagine, when they're talking about the empowerment dynamic triangle, that's, you know, that very much gels with everything they're doing. Now, they do come very much from a sort of work environment perspective, but I find more often than not it's very easily relatable into more personal environment. So they say, when just be grateful, in quotation marks, is used to offset every difficult situation, it can become a cliche or even trivialized. The truth is, though, that gratitude cultivates more effective outcomes. It's not just a sweet sentiment. It's a powerful path to wisdom and higher intelligence. But this is what sort of started hooking me in at this point, that I sometimes feel that this whole notion of gratitude and gratitude journaling can become a bit saccharine, it can sort of grate on your nerves when you're in that place where the last thing you're kind of feeling is gratitude. And it's like, oh, it's all very well you saying that, but how am I supposed to do it? Because I don't feel much gratitude at the moment. I understand the logic of it, but I don't see how I can apply it. So I thought, well, you know, this might be interesting. So they talk about this role of challenger being the antidote to the persecutor role that's from the dreaded drama triangle. One of the abilities the challenger energy brings forth is viewing problems as learning opportunities. That's something we bang on about a lot, isn't it? The larger question becomes, can you be grateful for the opportunity to learn even in the middle of difficult situations? And I often find that something that maybe comes more from hindsight than in the moment. So, you know, if you could learn to do it a bit more in the moment, it might make those moments a little bit easier. Maybe. Who knows? Once problems arise and you react from old patterns, it's very difficult to access the amazing power of gratitude. Yes, agree with that. You may even look for somebody to blame for the mess that you're in. However, if you can take a stand for learning and growth as your outcome, you can still move forward despite the problems in a state of gratitude and appreciation. Gratitude for both the good and the difficult in your life is a choice and a practice, and it takes time to develop this broader perspective. But, they say, there's always a but, isn't there? If you wait to begin a practice of gratitude only when things are going well, you'll always be waiting. When you're in a state of gratitude, they say, you notice that your mood becomes light and your physiological vibration lifts. Well, yes, I would say if you're doing that when you're in a good place, but not necessarily if you're in a bad place. This new state allows you to see life and the world through a new lens. This energy shift builds momentum and gives you the energy to take action towards what you care about. If you can see difficult situations as an opportunity to learn, you then become uniquely qualified to support others who are struggling in similar situations. Why? Because you can now compassionately and gratefully connect with them, knowing that life is hard sometimes. And they've got 3 tips to cultivate gratitude even during difficult times. First one, actively look for the good. When you intentionally look for the good in life, you are much more likely to recognize it even when things go wrong. If you do not choose to actively look for good, you may not see it when it's right in front of you. And going right back to our first episode, we chatted about this and I shared how it was a massive perspective change for me when I did a gratitude journal challenge for, I don't know, a month, I think it was 30 days, something like that. And I started realizing pretty quickly that my whole perspective was changing. It had been a little bit more negative and pessimistic, and I found it hard to start with, but I did start to really see my perspective change. It's like they say, isn't it? When you ask yourself a question, when you set your brain that sort of challenge to look for things, you start noticing things, don't you? So if you're in the market for a new whatever it is, you start spotting them everywhere, things like that. You send those messages to your brain and it starts looking in the direction you're sending it. So if that direction is a good one, a positive one of gratitude, that should be the track that your brain takes.
One of the examples for me, Daisy, with thinking about this whole concept is still going back to the early days of the pandemic, when most of us were just kind of swirling around, waiting for it to end. Little did we know how long it would take until things changed again. But, it was so easy to focus on all of the things that we had lost, all of the things that we were limited from doing or whatnot. And the people that I really saw doing the best were those who could say, I'm getting more time with my family now. Or those of us who lived alone were saying, how I live is really validated right now. And I have even more opportunity for my solitude. Or, just looking for ways to find some things about it. You didn't have to become Pollyanna about it, but you could just find some things like I'm learning some new how many people learn new sourdough recipes during the early pandemic? But just recognizing I'm experiencing things right now that are going to somehow teach me something or provide me something that I wouldn't have if I weren't going through this now.
Yes, it's interesting that you use that example because, I was very much one for it. It was very much the way I tended to live, and it was really interesting to me to see how everyone else coped. It was an interesting perspective for me to see how many people really fell apart in something that I just took as quite a norm.
Mm-hmm.
And so the second tip is write down the good you recognize in a gratitude journal. Research has shown that just a few minutes a day recording what you are grateful for significantly increases a positive mood, which seeds creativity and well-being. And I did notice that, as I've just mentioned. I did that, and I did see a big, pretty seismic shift, actually. It's one of those things that I look back on as being something that really, really changed the way I looked at life. So, yeah, pretty big shift. And the third tip is to begin an appreciation practice. At the start of a business meeting or before a family dinner, ask each person to share what has worked well since the last conversation. When focused on what is working more than what's not, people report the mood becomes more positive and conversations are easier and more productive. And I have heard a few people talking about this. I think maybe Rangan Chatterjee has chatted about it in some of his episodes. And I'm sure just people we know have talked about it, that it's something that they have a routine. If they have a family, it's something that is a routine around their family dining table, that they go around the table and they share a few things. In fact, I'm sure now, thinking about it, it was Rangan Chatterjee that I remember talking about it as a daily practice. And I can't remember the 3 things they each had to come up with, but it was, something like, this is something I've learned today. This is something I did for somebody else today. And this is something or other. I can't remember, but I seem to remember there were sort of 3 things. And they took it in turns as a family. I think there's something like a family of 4, it's the 2 of them and 2 kids. And they would go around, and this is something that they would do every day. So again, if you know this is coming, it trains your brain to be looking out for it as you go through your day. Maybe it will influence your actions as well. So you've got something to share when it comes to dinner. And of course, it's going to be a point of connection with the people you're sharing it with, a conversation starter, all sorts of things really. So yeah, I quite like that. In the process of looking for the good, these grateful moments become like a magnifying glass that enlarges your focus and connects you to the positive feelings that arise when you focus on what you appreciate. You are literally, I know you hate that word, teaching your neurological system what you value, and in the process, you counterbalance your brain's tendency to think about what's not going well. So again, it's just skimming that perspective, isn't it? They do say, though, there is one other key point to note, and that is you can feel both a positive emotion from being in a state of gratitude and still feel anxiety about the problems you are facing. We are complex human beings that have the capacity to feel both at the same time. And I think you sort of nail it when you say, you don't have to be Pollyanna about it. But as you may have realised, this struck a chord with me, as I have not been in a good place. As you know, I lost my beloved Bets. And as everyone who's listening will know now, I haven't been too free and easy with sharing it. I usually have to take a minute before I can share these things. I'm getting emotional about it now. But you shared something with me, and I couldn't for the life of me remember exactly what you said, but I did find it helpful. So I'm hoping that you can bring that back to mind. But I think it's really hard when you're in the midst of grief and people try and help, people try and say the right thing, and there's kind of nothing. And there were a few things, the kind of things that people say. It's the kind of thing that I say when somebody loses their one of their best friends, basically, is, things that I knew myself. I knew that I'd done the right thing at the right time. I knew that I'd done the right thing by her. I knew that I'd given her a good life. I knew that I've spent the last however many 6 months dedicated to being her carer, doing all sorts of things that she couldn't do for herself anymore. And, all these things I kind of knew, but still nothing feels really like it helps very much when you're in the pit of despair, not to be too melodramatic about it. But you said something along the lines of, and I was thinking about this earlier today when I was thinking about sharing this with you, and it's another pivotal moment, and this was back in my school days when I was doing A-level and we were studying Keats, and it was his poem Ode on Melancholy. I think I shared this actually when we did the episode on gratitude journaling, and probably mentioned it then, but he talks about the fact that melancholy and joy reside in the same place. Basically, you can't have one without the other, and you can't fully experience and appreciate the one without the other. And so it's about this balance, and what they mentioned about you can feel gratitude and anxiety at the same time. And I extrapolated from that. You can feel gratitude and even some joy at the same time as feeling intense grief and pain and despair and all the rest of it. These things can coexist. And you said something along the lines, and maybe you could share this, but something along the lines of the pain you're feeling, as bad as it is kind of proof positive of how much love there was. And that, again, it was kind of something I knew, but it was a good reminder in the moment to have. And I probably have definitely won't have said it as well as you do, but perhaps you can just elaborate a bit on that, because I found it very helpful. So I'm sure there are people out there who would also find it helpful in a similar situation.
Well, I just happened to pull up our conversation so I could see what I had said. And what I said is that the pain of letting go of our pets, because both you and I know that pain, it's a grief that is so painful and sometimes lasts forever. Sometimes people talk about grief as, it's just a time thing, you'll get through it and stuff. But the reality that, grief doesn't just go away. It changes, it evolves, it has different phases. But it's so painful and sometimes lasts forever. But at the same time, it's something that no pet lover would ever regret going through, based on the privilege of getting to spend the time that we have with them.
That's right, yeah.
And so there's the gratitude in that. It's almost like the amount of pain you could feel in having to let her go, like you said, is proof positive for the privilege that you had of being with her for 12 years, being her complete, you were always, the person who cared for her. But in these past 6 months, the intensity of that and the gift that was, even though you were having to go through this pain of losing her.
Yes, exactly. And I think it's something that it does give you something in the moment just to know, because anyone who's been through it knows that it does get a bit easier. Like you say, it doesn't go away, but you just learn how to live with it. I'm trying to think of the quote somebody was talking in either on a podcast, or it might have even been in a novel I was listening to. They were talking about how you just adjust, it wraps around you in a different way. But it's those first few days, it's that, it's the period of time when it's so present and so visceral and so physical. And, my face ached from crying. My eyes were swollen shut. My face was puffy. And so it just becomes this all encompassing. And funnily enough, I came down with a cold a couple of days later. In fact, I think it might have been from the vet who came out with the benefits of hindsight. But so just a couple of days after that, I got hit with a cold. And, that weekend I was really just, again, after the face swelling had gone down, I felt physically really, really poorly with the cold. And I can always tell when I'm properly ill, because I can, and all I want to do is sleep all day. But then I can get to sleep at night. So it's not those, days of depression where I'm eating and sleeping and then I can't sleep at night and my sleep patterns get awful. When you're properly sick, is that your body just tells you you've got to sleep all the time. And I was telling my sister when she checked in with me, and she was kind of, maybe your body felt like it needed to get a cold, so it would floor you for a few days. And I think actually, although it didn't feel great in the moment, it kind of probably was what I needed, that complete sort of downtime of wallowing in a cold, wallowing in your grief, wallowing in it, really feeling it and kind of embracing it and going through it and knowing that you'll come out of the other side of that sort of intense period, and it goes into, like you were saying, a different phase. It goes into it, but at least you're not bursting into tears all the time and having an aching face. But yes, especially now I'm sort of past the point of just sobbing all the time. It's a weird but different way of looking at something so painful with that spin of gratitude that it's a good thing that pain was so intense, because that the balance of that, there's a reason for it being that bad. There's a reason for feeling that bad.
I always used to say to clients when they were really struggling after an intense loss, I would be more concerned for them if they weren't feeling that.
Yeah.
Because that would make me question, the relationship that they had, or their ability to allow themselves to feel. But it's really hard to go through a loss that significant and not feel that pain. And it reminds me of something that, if anyone's friends with me on Facebook, they probably have seen me share these comments with them. But whenever someone that I'm not closely connected with, but, I'm having this dialogue through Facebook, when they share that their pet has died, or their family member, or their partner or something, oftentimes my response involves, something about how I hope they go through this time as they grieve and celebrate. Again, pointing out that it's a two-sided process right now. There's grieving, there's pain, there's sorrow, there are some voids, but there's also celebration in recounting so many memories with the person or the animal that we've lost, and celebrating that gift that we have had. But it's having both of those simultaneously. I'm grieving and celebrating.
Yeah.
That's the recognizing the loss and the pain, also while being grateful. They don't have to cancel each other.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's just getting on with the usual stuff. That was the thing that's been brought home to me, how different she was from the other two. They're French bulldogs, they're a companion breed. That's their breed. They're companion dogs. That's what they're bred to do. And as you know, that's all she wanted to do. She wanted to be with me all the time. If I was washing up, she'd be asleep on the kitchen floor. If I was sitting at the computer here, she'd be asleep at my feet. If I was on the sofa, she'd be on the sofa. If I was on the bed, she'd be on the bed.
If you were recording a podcast, she'd want to be up on your lap into the microphone.
The number of times, that's what she was doing, wasn't it? Snoring in the background. But of course, then what becomes very difficult for the person who's left behind is that you go to do all those normal day-to-day things that are normal day-to-day, every day, all the things. And you're just reminded all the time. It was difficult, and we had this conversation just before we started, that I found it almost impossible to I did finally edit the last episode that we'd recorded, because I could hear her snoring in the background, so that was really hard. And it's been hard to record the next episode, because, you're used to looking over my shoulder and there she is, and she was such a part of this podcast. So you have these associations, you have these norms, and it's really difficult. And it's quite funny. Like I'll come home now, if I've been out on my own, I come home and I would always have to be really careful opening the kitchen door, because she would have her nose right up against the door waiting for me to walk through. So automatically I'm being careful about opening the door. I open the door, nobody's there. Nobody's bothered getting up. They're all they're in their beds. So it's a whole different dynamic, and the dynamic in the house has changed, and the dynamic amongst the dogs has changed a bit, not that much, but mostly it's been me trying to get used to things. But yes, it's difficult. It's a difficult thing on one hand, but on the other hand, as you were saying, it's just, it's proof of what you had. It's the balance. It's like Keats talks about. It's the melancholy and joy living in the same place. And to have that real joy, to really experience, you know, the love and the gratitude for what she gave me, what I could give her, you're going to have to pay it back when they go.
It's also similar, Daisy, I think, even when we're not talking about like a significant loss, a death of a family member, including our furry family members. But even things like just going through difficulties, losing a job, travel plans that fall through at the last minute, something that you're ready, you've been saving your money for, when you go to buy it, it's no longer available. Like these upsets, these problems. And one
losses,
of the things,
they're losses, aren't they?
They are losses, but they're also opportunities because they teach us new things. If I missed out on my opportunity to go on that trip because the world shut down, I then eventually went into problem-solving mode. What am I going to do with that money I had set aside for that? What other experience do I want to do now that I can? Or we learn how to manage things differently. We learn problem-solving. And so many people in the entrepreneurial self-improvement space talk about we don't learn through successes so much.
Yeah, true.
We learn through our challenges. We grow, we learn because it pushes us to. But in the moment, it's uncomfortable. We don't want to be going through it. But it actually is what creates us moving forward and becoming more, experiencing more. If we didn't have challenges, well, one, it would be impossible to prevent having challenges, but we just wouldn't grow the way that we do by accepting that these are part of our regular life experience.
Yeah, so I think the moral of the story is it's going back to what they were saying about you can't just practice it in the good times. Well, you can practice it in the good moments, but you really need to start learning how to appreciate, how to be grateful for things, or trying to find even the smallest sliver in the difficult moments. Because it does help. But that's, as you were saying, that's the challenging bit. But that's also the point where you can learn and you can grow and something can come out of it.
Absolutely.
And in that moment, you can actually make the challenge of it a little bit easier. But it takes practice.
It still often goes back to that Disney movie, Inside Out.
Yeah.
When, recognizing the multitude of emotions that can happen around the same experience. So the challenge, the anxiety, the fear, the anger, and love, and appreciation, that they can exist together. And it's actually helpful if we can acknowledge how they exist together.
Yeah.
And invite that in.
So there you go. Thank you for going through that with me.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And yes, thank you for letting me share that. There are people out there who know now. Like I say, I found it a bit difficult to share, but I know there are lots of people out there who loved Bets from afar. I'm not going to say it surprised me, because it didn't surprise me. She was the kind of dog that inspired that. There weren't many people that didn't meet her, that didn't love her, but the love from afar, from people who had only ever met her virtually, who I know will be sad to hear that she is no longer here. So I know there's lots of love around the world for dear old Bets.
Absolutely. And also partly people love her because they know what she meant to you. And you're important to them. And so knowing that she brought things to your life means a lot to people who care about you also.
Thanks for that. Okay, until next week, when it will be your turn to share something.
Looking forward to it, Daisy.
I hope you have a wonderful week.
Thank you. Take good care, everybody.